What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video, and this video is going to be looking at the match between Manchester City and Tottenham Hotspurs in each of their first match of the Premier League season. So before we start, check out my book. It's online, it's on Amazon, and there's a link in the description below. Also, be sure to check out my other social media links where I post exclusive content, as well as the link to Keyframe, which is how I made this video. So let's get right into the video. All that stuff is in the description. So Manchester City, they had the same structure that they used in the Community Shield, and this consisted of two central defenders with narrow fullbacks. So now the narrow fullbacks typically played a little bit higher than the central defenders, but primarily played in the half space to try and target progression around the first line of Tottenham Hotspur's defense. And the half spaces were used to create better passing situations into advanced areas. So higher up the field, we had a single pivot of Fernandinho, and then players occupying the space between the lines were Grealish, Ferran Torres, and Ilkay Gundogan. And there is three players occupying the three central corridors in between the lines, and Ferran Torres was the striker, but he often played as more of a number 10, occupying the space between the central defenders and central midfielders in between Grealish and Gundogan. Now Nuno Espirito Santo and his new Tottenham team, they played a 4-3-3 in their defensive phase, which was very effective defending this build-up from Manchester City. And one of the reasons it was so effective is because of the natural cover shadows that were created to block access into dangerous area for Manchester City. So what I mean by this is the three central midfielders almost aligned perfectly with the three advanced players of Manchester City. So we had natural cover shadows blocking the three Manchester City players between the lines. As well, we had natural cover shadows of the front three blocking Fernandinho, and these players were then in close proximity to press the narrow fullbacks, or if they wanted to be more proactive and progressive, they could even jump to press the two central defenders. And typically when Tottenham went to press or a midfielder would step out, then this activated central defender to step into the midfield line to then provide extra cover and maintain the vertical connection of the vertical partnerships of players in the same line. So if Højbjerg were to jump out, one of the two central defenders would often jump to the player between the line, not allowing them too much free space. So what kept happening with this diamond midfield shape of Manchester City is they found it very hard to get the ball for obvious reasons we just talked about, of the natural blocking of passing angles by the Tottenham setup. But one way Manchester City looked to solve this problem became moving players like Ilkay Gundogan into wider positions. So this utilized the vacant space in the wide area, usually in the interior part of the wide area, but also this was primarily due to the increased passing space that was created from the fullback to the winger. So this distance was generally too large to go to a direct diagonal pass from one player to the next. Because of the longer distance, it made it easier to defend and gave Tottenham more time to shift over or even potentially intercept this pass. So that's why at times Gundogan or Grealish would then drop outside of the midfield block to evade the cover shadow, shorten the passing distance, and try and progress around the Tottenham mid-block because there weren't much space between the lines and central areas to disrupt their defensive shape and progress. So the reason for Tottenham's very narrow midfield and forward line was because it put the wide wingers in natural positions to press diagonally of the fullbacks, and what this would do is it made it easier for them to take away Fernandinho as a passing option to then potentially disrupt their defense. So with the winger position narrow and very close to Son and Lucas, Bergwijn could then press diagonally, utilizing his cover shadow to the maximum extent, which would then force the ball to go wide where there is typically no passing option, or it would force the winger to drop deeper, giving him a negative field of view and making it easier to defend against. So this was the first form of pressing that we saw from Tottenham, and the other would be if there was circulation or the first line was beaten, the midfielder would shift out, and as we talked about previously, a defender would then jump to the player between the lines typically, and maintain vertical connection and maintain their compactness. So as we see here, at times Tottenham did become more proactive and more aggressive in their press. So as we see here, with Lucas Moura now jumping to a central defender rather than the ball waiting for the ball to go to a fullback, this ignited the press also from Højbjerg to jump with the pressing Lucas Moura and to maintain this vertical partnership which they had, to maintain connection and give Højbjerg access to Benjamin Mendy, the fullback. As well, it would spark defenders to then jump between the lines to take care of Grealish as well. But when this would happen, they were very, very organized, and they did this very well. And we can see just the natural covering of players between the line. We can see Benjamin Mendy and Fernandinho are pretty much out of the picture because of the position of the ball, the position of the press, where Tottenham controls space, and the players they have around to press these players, as well as the general setup, didn't favor progression in the wide area for Manchester City. Manchester City really looked to have their first progression be through the center to disrupt the Tottenham defense and then go into the wide areas, but Tottenham were very structured and prevented this from happening on most occasions. Now, at times when Tottenham couldn't maintain their compactness and press to use their cover shadow, they would have Son drop deeper to make sure that Fernandinho wasn't able to get on the ball, because if the first line of press was broken and the ball arrived into a central corridor, this would pretty much guarantee the disruption of Tottenham's defense and make it harder for them to transition into a lower block behind the ball. So this added security from Son being able to recognize the situation when he had to drop into man mark Fernandinho gave Tottenham an even greater advantage when they had to move deeper or restructure themselves to force the ball wide and then press into wider areas. One potential issue for Tottenham in their defensive phase that Man City was able to start to exploit a little bit in the first half was when they did build with their normal structure of their 2-3 build-up as they used in this match, but the problems became further up the field where we've highlighted Ferran Torres dropping deeper as the number 10, but then making advanced runs. And when this became an issue was when one of the central defenders would jump to a midfielder too early and not become spatially oriented in terms of positioning. So here Dyer is drawn to Gundogan, which then leaves Sanchez with a 2v2 in the central defending position, and now it allows Ferran Torres to access this blind spot of Eric Dyer in behind, which then leads to a more direct pass from City, offering them a position in behind. So Tottenham have the numerical advantage in the midfield using their cover shadows, but when these players would attract a central defender, it definitely left space in behind if they made deep runs successfully and were able to exploit the blind spot of a central defender who is jumping. Now in the second half, the biggest change that I noticed in terms of their tactics was the slight adjustment of the fullbacks to maintain a little bit wider position in possession. So this was trying to get City into wider position and give them easier progression from wide areas to then go further up the field. But what happened was it even more so gave Tottenham the opportunity to transition into more dangerous areas when they won the ball. So offensive transitions for Tottenham were huge in this game, and from their setup, their structure facilitated clean progressions offensively very well. So their ideal progression came when Son would receive the ball, and then they'd have runners in each of the half spaces to target the space around the central defenders and between the fullbacks, while Son was on the ball dribbling, attacking the central corridor. So they'd have 3 players each in the central corridor, 2 options around the central defenders and between the wide fullbacks, and 1 option of the ball carrier going through the central area. The structure in the second half for Manchester City and how much wider the positioning of the fullbacks, and this is only a few yards, maybe 5 to 10 yards positioning, but look at the space that's created as a result of this. But it also, when Zinchenko, De Bruyne came on, it helped Grealish play a little bit better, and it really strengthened the wide structures with Grealish in the wide area and Kevin De Bruyne in a more advanced position with Zinchenko at the base. So these changes structurally and in terms of the people they brought on it gave City a little bit more danger going forward because they had to really go for the game in the last 10-15 minutes. But with De Bruyne coming on, playing between the lines rather than Grealish, helped Manchester City move the ball into more dangerous areas and put Grealish in a more natural position he's more comfortable in. When Tottenham had to defend in their low block, they maintained their structure of a 4-3-3, which at first I thought would go to a 4-5-1, but Nuno kept the 4-3-3 structure and dropped the two wingers a little bit deeper than Son, and Son was their main outlet going forward. So it was almost a 4-3-2-1 with narrow wingers just ahead of the midfielders and Son at the point. But their vertical compactness increased drastically in their low block to limit the space the forwards had for Manchester City to run into, so they had no space to run into behind, and the midfielders made sure they had no space to check back for the cutback as well for Manchester City, which made it very hard for them when they got into these crossing positions and behind to pick out a cross because of the compactness and positioning of the Tottenham players. So now we're going to look at the transitions for Tottenham, which was the main source of their better chances. So here, Bergwijn won the ball and then played it to an overlapping Højbjerg. So their ideal transition consisted of players running through each half space, as we see here with Højbjerg and Lucas Moura, between Højbjerg and Bergwijn on the weak side, and then now Son would run through vertically through the central defenders to narrow the connection between central defenders and open up space for the runners around the central defenders in the half spaces. Now from an even better angle, we have our two central defenders, we have our fullbacks, our holding midfielder, and our weak side fullback. And now our transition structure for Tottenham, we have Lucas Moura, Bergwijn on the ball, and Son in the left half space, and now they tried to play as narrow as possible to exploit the space between fullback and central defender while still accessing strong passing connections either around or through the central defender. But if the central defenders didn't collapse and prioritize the runners, then this would often lead to a free progression for the player on the ball for Tottenham Hotspurs to then go directly at goal first to try and collapse the defense or just go straight to goal. Now Tottenham's build-up shape, they did play quite direct in this match and didn't try and progress the ball systematically in a more positional play sense, but their structure did start with Hugo Lloris splitting the two central defenders. Then they had a double pivot with their fullbacks playing a little bit deeper but being the widest players in their structure. Manchester City looked to counter this with their typical 4-4-2 or their 4-2-2-2, as we see here with now Grealish playing alongside the central forward Ferran Torres and having a very minor role defensively, pretty much just blocking the double pivot of Tottenham in the first phase and playing in and around the left half space for a transition. As they moved deeper, it moved more to a 4-4-2, with the wingers dropping alongside the two midfielders of Fernandinho and Gundogan, and the Tottenham build-up shape consisted of two central defenders and the double pivot, which looked to stagger themselves, which saw Højbjerg dropping into the right half space a lot of time, creating a three-man connection with the two central defenders and disrupting the two main forwards of Manchester City. So then what this did between the lines, they often had 3 or 4 players, depending on which of the forwards dropped into these positions between the lines, and we saw Dele Alli now joining into the attack in a more advanced position, playing in this more of a 10 role, which he's more natural to in the left half space, just deeper than the strikers, with then the fullbacks again creating the width in the team, but looking for a more direct approach from this Tottenham side, not taking risks in possession or trying to build out of the back if that's not their strength. So now with the double pivot, we also saw Dele Alli again creating asymmetry, moving higher up the field in the left half space, and at times we did see only one player drop, so they moved to more of a 4-4-2 structure in possession of the ball, with the wingbacks going much higher and 2 forwards staying again against the central defenders for Manchester City. So what this did was it tried to pull Manchester City out with their 2 holding midfielders and look for a more direct approach overloading the space around the Manchester City fullback, with the Tottenham fullback advancing, joining the forwards who stayed high, and creating a more efficient direct approach. So that's going to wrap up today's analysis, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.